The first thing I smelled was rosin, pine dust and old wood. It clung to my fingers, to the black lacquer of my violin, to the inside of my throat every time I drew a breath too sharply. Pain had a smell too, though no one ever admitted it. Copper, sweat, something thin and sour beneath the powder I'd pressed over the bruise on my wrist. I stood beneath a chandelier worth more than my childhood apartment and lifted the bow with 2 fingers that should have been in a splint. Smile, Carlo Neri had told me an hour earlier, gripping my jaw hard enough to leave crescents. Your background music, not tragedy. The case lid had come down on my left hand after that. Fast. Deliberate. He looked almost bored while I tried not to scream. Now the first note left my violin and entered a ballroom full of people who wore charity like diamonds, polished, expensive, and cold. Men in black suits stood near the walls with the stillness of men carrying guns. Women shimmered under gold light. Crystal flashed. Waiters moved like ghosts through the soft tide of voices. Beside me, Leah, the youngest cellist in our quartet, swallowed so hard I heard it between measures. She was 19, all knees and concentration, and the kind of talented that still believed the world had rules. "It's all right," I whispered without moving my mouth. It wasn't all right. But sometimes the body obeyed old training even when life stopped making sense. Keep the tempo, protect the ensemble, finish the passage, so I did. My 2 injured fingers were taped under the silk wrap I'd wound around my hand in the taxi. I shifted pressure where I could, lied to the strings, let open notes carry what the broken ones couldn't. The melody came out thinner than I wanted, but true enough that only another musician would hear the cheating. Unfortunately for me, that room held one man who noticed everything. I felt him before I saw him. The sound changed first, not the music, the room around it. Conversation thinned, glasses still. Italian, low and fast near the bar, cut off in the middle of a word. That kind of silence did not belong to good men. I looked up on instinct. He had just entered through the side archway, surrounded by quiet in the way some men were surrounded by cologne. Tall. Black suit, no tie, dark hair brushed back from a face so controlled it almost looked carved until you reached the eyes. Those were alive in a dangerous way, not hot, not wild, worse, measured. Lorenzo Vitelli. I knew the name the way everyone in parts of the city knew it, as a shape cast over businesses, judges, donations, disappearances. My landlord lowered his voice when it came up. My mother crossed herself. He did not look at the guests first. He looked at exits, corners, windows, men. Then his gaze moved to the quartet like he was checking another item in a room he owned. I should have looked away. Instead, on a bad, stupid pulse of pride, I held his gaze through the end of a phrase. That was when Carlo Neri chose to get closer. He drifted from the bar, with a smile greasy enough to stain the air. To everyone else he was a sponsor, a patron of the arts, a man who donated to youth music programs with one hand and ruined girls with the other. He stopped beside us, whiskey in one hand, and bent low enough that his breath touched my cheek. "Pretty," he murmured. "See, you can still play when you're properly motivated." My hand shook. I kept the bow moving. Leah missed a beat. I stepped half an inch in front of her without thinking, widening my shoulder so she had to look at my dress, not Carlo's face. His smile sharpened. Then he reached for my left wrist. The pain was white, clean, almost holy in its brutality. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood, but I didn't stop. I finished the measure. I finished the next one too. And because God made me proud before he made me sensible, I looked past Carlo and straight at Lorenzo Vitelli while I did it. Not for rescue, for witness. I wanted one person in that room to see what was being done and understand that I had not bowed for it. Carlo tightened his grip. "Enough," I said quietly. He laughed. It happened very fast after that. Lorenz was across the floor before the chord resolved. 1 second he stood beneath the archway. The next he was beside us, taking Carlo's wrist in a grip so calm it looked polite. But Carlo made a sound I would hear later in my sleep. "You're disturbing the music," Lorenzo said. His voice was low, almost gentle. The kind of voice a priest might have if priests made men go pale. Carlo released me at once. Lorenzo, I know what you were doing. He didn't raise his voice. The ballroom somehow heard him anyway. My fingers lost strength. The bow slipped. I caught it against my shoulder and hated myself for that tiny sign of weakness more than I hated Carlo. Lorenzo's eyes dropped to my hand, not to my face, not to my mouth, my hand. The silk had shifted. Blood had seeped through the pale wrap and onto the ebony fingerboard in two dark streaks. He went still. For one dangerous second, so did I. Something changed in his expression then, not softness, not pity, something colder and more personal. A memory, maybe. A rage he had not intended to bring into the room. Leah whispered my name. I used my body to block her line of sight to the blood on the strings. Keep your eyes on the stand, I told her. Third line. Come in on my breath. That was the exact moment Lorenzo noticed me, I think. Not the dress, not the music. The fact that I was bleeding and still worried about the girl beside me. His gaze lifted slowly from my hand to my face. Doctor, he said to no one I could see. A woman in charcoal silk appeared at his left shoulder as if she had been grown from the marble. Mid-40s. Sharp eyes, sharper mouth, a doctor's bag in hand. I'm fine, I said. It was a ridiculous lie. My voice shook on the first word. Lorenzo glanced at Carlo without taking his eyes fully off me. Remove him. Two men did, efficiently. No spectacle, no explanation. Carlo made one startled protest that ended the moment a hand landed at the back of his neck. The guests pretended not to stare. The quartet pretended not to tremble. Wealthy people were very talented at surviving elegant rooms. The woman reached for my hand. Let me see. I need to pack my instrument. You need to sit down, she said. I said I'm fine. Lorenzo's mouth moved by a fraction, not a smile, something stranger. Recognition, maybe, as if my anger fit some private equation in his head. Little fury, he said, so softly I almost thought I imagined it. I looked up. What? He crouched without warning, one knee touching polished marble, and picked up the strip of tape that had fallen from my wrap. A powerful man on the floor at my feet should have been absurd. It made the room lean toward him even more. Your violin, he said. Give it to him. A gray-haired man in a dark suit stepped forward carefully, hands open. Gianni Russo, though I didn't know his name yet. No, my fingers tightened on the neck. Lorenzo looked at my hand again. You're going to pass out. I'm not. Then prove me wrong after the doctor sees you. It was not a concern that undid me. It was the fact that he had noticed the exact place where I was most breakable and had not used it against me. Bianca, the doctor, I would learn, took my hand gently this time. Gentle enough that something hot threatened my eyes, which was unacceptable. I turned away from everyone and fixed on the far wall until the chandelier blurred. Hairline fractures, maybe more, she said after one touch. She needs imaging. No hospital, I said immediately. That got Lorenzo's attention in a new way. No insurance, Bianca asked. No police, I said, a pause, not long enough. Lorenzo stood. Bring her to the house. Every instinct I had left flared at once. Absolutely not. He looked at me, then at the blood on my strings. You can't even hold the bow, little fury. My chin lifted on its own. Watch me. Something almost human flashed through his eyes then, not amusing exactly, but close enough to make my stomach feel strange and disloyal. He reached out. I thought he meant to take the violin. Instead, his hand hovered for one suspended second near my wrist, not touching, as if asking a question his mouth had no intention of voicing. That almost undid me more than the pain. Then he stepped aside and let Bianca support my elbow. I did not faint. I did not cry. I walked past crystal and silk, and the smell of truffle butter, while blood dried tacky on my fingers and armed men, opened a private corridor I hadn't noticed before. Behind me, the quartet's music had stopped completely. Ahead of me, the hallway narrowed into shadow, thick carpet, soundproofed walls, and a bronze elevator that required a key. When the doors opened, Lorenzo entered beside me without a word. Only once they closed did I finally let my head tip back against mirrored steel. I saw him in reflection, watching my injured hand, not my face. I hated how safe that made me feel. When the elevator reached the private garage, his men were already waiting in a black car. "Get in," Bianca said. "I have my apartment keys," I answered, though I had no idea why that seemed important. Lorenzo opened the rear door himself. "Not tonight." That was the last ordinary sentence anyone said to me. The car door shut, and my old life went dark. The Vitelli house was not what I expected. I had imagined vulgarity. Gold faucets, naked statues, the sort of taste that shouted because it had once been poor and never forgiven the experience. Instead, the estate sat above the Hudson in gray stone and old money silence, the kind of place that understood power never needed to explain itself. The floors were blackened white marble. The walls held saints, landscapes, and one brutal modern canvas that looked like a throat opening. Somewhere deeper in the house, a grandfather clock counted out the seconds of my captivity in a stern, expensive voice. Bianca took me to a sitting room off a private medical suite. "Sit, I'd prefer a cab. You'd prefer morphine in about 10 minutes, she said. She was beautiful in the unforgiving way some women became after grief shaped them into something exact. Dark hair pinned without softness. No wedding ring, but the pale groove where one had lived. I sat because my knees were beginning to negotiate with gravity in bad faith. She cut away the silk wrap, and I looked at the ceiling while she worked. The room smelled clean, medicinal, with a note of old cedar from the cabinets. When she touched the base of my ring finger, black dotted my vision. "Swear," she said. I did. "Good. That means you're still conscious." She splinted 2 fingers, taped the hand properly, gave me something for pain that made the edges of the room loosen, and asked no unnecessary questions. I liked her for that immediately and distrusted her for the same reason. People in Lorenzo Vitelli's house had learned what not to ask. When she finished, she stepped back. "No playing for 6 weeks, I laughed once. It sounded ugly. "That bad? That's honest." A movement in the doorway made me straighten. Lorenzo had not changed clothes. He stood with one hand in his pocket, the other bare at his side, like a man who had only paused between more important violences. I became stupidly aware of the fact that my shoes had been removed at some point, that I was in a borrowed robe over my black concert dress, that my hair was half fallen and my pride completely so. Bianca noticed the way my spine changed. "Don't let him loom," she said without looking at him. "He enjoys it." "I do not," Lorenzo said. "You absolutely do." A large man in a navy suit appeared behind him carrying a tray. Broad shoulders, broken nose, kind eyes, and the expression of someone enduring a private tragedy. "Her tea," he said mournfully. "No sugar, because apparently sweetness is now a controlled substance in this house." Bianca rolled her eyes. "Nico, if you complain one more time about your sodium restriction—" "It is not a restriction," he said. "It is a targeted campaign against joy." Despite myself, I looked at him. He put the tray down and bowed slightly. "Nico Greco, driver, surveillance, occasional hostage in Mara's war on carbohydrates. You must be the violinist." "Adriana." "Beautiful name," he said. "If you stay here long enough, don't accept soup from Mara unless she's smiling. If she is smiling, definitely don't accept soup." "I can hear you," a woman called from the hallway. Nico lifted his gaze to the ceiling. "And that is Mara Bianchi, quartermaster, executioner of seasoning, and the unattainable love of my deeply mistreated life." I should not have smiled. My hand hurts too much to smile. Somehow I did anyway. Lorenzo noticed. Of course he did. Nico noticed that Lorenzo noticed and got a look on his face that suggested he planned to survive by becoming invisible. "I'm leaving," he announced. "My mother says stress raises blood pressure, and I am committed to disobeying only one woman at a time." When he vanished, the room felt larger and more dangerous. Bianca gathered instruments. "I'll send food." "I'm not staying," I said. She looked at Lorenzo instead of me. "Tell her." He waited until the door closed behind her, that control again. He never hurried to fill silence. He let it collect around other people until they were the ones tempted to break. "I had your apartment checked," he said. Cold slid down my back. You what? Your lock was forced. Carlo Neri's men were there before mine. I gripped the edge of the chair with my good hand. My mother, in a rehab clinic under another name as of an hour ago. Safe, he paused. Your brother's school has guards. I stared at him. How do you know where my brother goes to school? Because I make it my business to know who's being threatened under my roof. That isn't an answer. It's the one you're getting tonight. Anger. Steadied me more effectively than the pain medication. I stood too fast, swayed, hated that, and put a palm to the side table until the room remembered how to behave. You don't get to move my family around like pieces on a board. No, his voice remained level. Neri broke your fingers and tried to retrieve something from your apartment before the blood dried on your strings. You don't have the luxury of pretending this is still your life to manage alone. Maybe I don't want your help. That was when his gaze changed again, just slightly, not offended, not surprised. As if he had expected that exact line and respected me a little for handing it to him unwrapped. I know, he said. The answer hit harder than a denial would have. He crossed the room slowly enough that I could have stepped back if I wanted to. I didn't. That disturbed me more than his approach did. What did you take from Carlo? He asked. Nothing. He looked at my splinted hand. Wrong answer. You think because he hurt me. I must know why. I think men like Carlo don't break musicians for sport in my ballroom unless something has already gone wrong. My being poor isn't a conspiracy. His jaw tightened at that. A small thing, the first crack in all that composure. No, he said, it's an inconvenience other men exploit. I did step back then. Because for one dangerous second, his anger had sounded like it belonged to me. What are your rules? I asked, hating how quickly the words came out. Until I know what Neri wants, you don't leave the estate without my men. I'm not your prisoner. No. His gaze dropped to my hand and returned to my face. But you are not walking back into an open threat because pride offends you. There was something so maddeningly reasonable in the way he said it that I wanted to throw the tea at him. Instead I said, and if I refuse? Then you'll refuse tomorrow, he replied. Tonight you're exhausted. I opened my mouth, closed it, hated that he was right, hated more that my body had already betrayed me by leaning toward the nearest chair. He moved then, fast and silent, not to catch me, but to set the chair behind my knees before I sat too hard. His hand brushed the uninjured side of my waist for less than a second. It was barely touched. My pulse reacted like a lyre. I looked at his hand. Large, scarred across the knuckles. A small white line near the thumb, old and deliberate-looking. He noticed me and withdrew it immediately. Sleep, he said. That's your rule. That's the first one. He turned toward the door. I thought he was leaving. At the threshold, he stopped without facing me. Little fury. I hated the warmth that rushed into my face at hearing it again. What? If you remember what Carlo wanted, you tell me before he asks with more than a case lid next time. The words should have frightened me. Instead, what stayed with me was the fact that he had said next time like he would already be between us when it came. When the door shut, I went to the window. From that wing, I could see the river, black and flat under the night, and the front courtyard where men in dark coats moved with purposeful silence. I pressed my good hand against the glass and saw my own reflection looking back, pale, startled, wrapped in borrowed luxury that did not belong to me. My normal life had not vanished in one dramatic explosion. It had gone the way strings went when wound too tight, quietly, suddenly, beyond repair. And somewhere in the house below, Lorenzo Vitelli was giving orders in a voice so calm the walls themselves seemed to obey him. He didn't have to raise it. I woke to church bells and the wrong mattress. That moment between sleep and memory lasted less than a second, but it was enough to hurt. My body reached automatically for the violin case on the floor beside my bed, for the ache of a life I understood, for the cracked plaster ceiling of my apartment in Queens. Instead there was linen the color of cream, a high plaster ceiling edged in old molding, and a tray of breakfast that looked too beautiful to trust. My hand throbbed in a slower, meaner rhythm now. The clean pain after the storm. Mara Bianchi arrived before I finished staring at the room. She was compact, dark-haired, and dressed entirely in black except for a silver tape measure looped around her neck like a threat. "Eat," she said. That sounded less like hospitality and more like an order. In this house, those are often the same thing. She set clothing on a chaise, jeans, a soft gray sweater, flat shoes. "You're thinner than the dress size Bianca guessed. That annoys me." I touched the sweater. Cashmere, real, not department store fantasy. "I can't pay for this. No one asked you to." Her expression changed by a hair. "Though if you bleed on it, I'll bury you myself." I almost laughed. "You sound like Nico. Nico sounds like Nico because God is cruel." After she left, I ate because hunger had turned sharp and embarrassing. Then I followed the smell of coffee and old wood down a corridor lined with closed doors and family portraits. Men with vitelli bones stared back from gilt frames. Stern mouths, controlled eyes. A dynasty of people no child would run to with a scraped knee. At the end of the east wing, I heard it. A piano, not well played, not badly either. One left-hand pattern repeated with irritating caution, each arpeggio landing a fraction flat because the middle pedal was sticking, and the top B string was a breath out of tune. I pushed the door with my shoulder. A girl of about 12 froze on the bench, dark braid, vitelli eyes, too guarded for 12. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You did," she answered. "Fair enough." She glanced at my splinted hand, then away as if she'd looked at something impolite. "You're the violinist, and you're playing an instrument nobody serviced after abusing it." Her head tilted. "The B above middle C," I said. "And the pedals catching. You can hear that?" "Yes." From the doorway, an older man's voice said, "So could my late wife, which is why I miss her every time this piano embarrasses me." I turned. Gianni Russo stood there in a navy cardigan over pressed trousers, silver hair combed back, reading glasses in one hand. He did not look like a consigliere. He looked like the kind grandfather I never got to keep long enough. "You must be Adriana Bellini," he said. "I'm Gianni, and this rude child is Lucia." "I'm not rude," Lucia muttered. "You are. It's one of your better traits." Something in me eased. He led me into a room attached to the music salon where workbenches held tools, varnish, and the skeletons of repaired instruments. My violin case sat open on the green felt like a patient awaiting surgery. "You touched my violin?" I asked before I could stop myself. Gianni arched his brow. "Only enough to keep it from drying out in bad air. Lorenzo said you D-object. He was correct." Of course he was. I stepped closer. The wood glowed in amber under morning light. My father had bought that violin second-hand when I was 14 by selling his wedding watch. I had hated him for other things. Never that. Gianni watched me look at it. "You love it properly," he said. "It's the only thing I've ever done properly for a long. That's rarely true of musicians. Usually they also make excellent bad decisions." I smiled in spite of myself. He saw my hand and his face softened. "May I?" When I nodded, he adjusted the chin rest, tightened one peg and said, "No playing, but you may listen." He drew the bow once across the G string. Deep, warm. Home entering the room by sound alone, my throat hurt suddenly. "You play," I said. "I survive." He set the violin down. "What did you hear last night besides pain?" I went still. "Lorenzo thinks Carlo Neri wanted an object," Gianni said mildly. "I think he wanted information." I looked toward the window instead of at him. Below, 2 black SUVs slid across the courtyard in soundless precision. "I heard a high ringing in my ears," I said. "And Leah missing her cue because she was afraid." "That's not what I asked." Before I could decide whether to answer, voices moved in the hallway. Male, low, fast Italian. Then one sentence in English, sharp enough to carry. "Check every fixture in the east wing." The little hairs along my arms lifted. Lorenzo entered with Rocco Serra at his side. Rocco was lean, severe, and built from edges rather than bulk. His eyes swept the room, assessed everyone, stopped at me only long enough to confirm I was intact. "Problem?" Gianni asked. Lorenzo looked at the chandelier above the piano. "Maybe." He crossed the room. Again that silence went with him, not empty but loaded. I became aware of Lucia sitting straighter on the bench, of Gianni stepping half a fraction aside, of Rocco staying close enough to kill for him without being instructed. Lorenzo's gaze lifted toward the ceiling. You said the piano sounded wrong. I said the pedal catches, and the B string is flat. He held my eyes. Something else. I listened. At first there was only house noise. Radiator click, distant footsteps, river wind nudging old glass. Then beneath it, very soft, very steady, a hum too regular to belong to architecture. I pointed to the chandelier. There! Rocco was already moving, dragging a chair beneath it. He removed the brass cup at the chain and cursed softly. What? Gianni asked. Transmitter, Rocco said. The room chilled. Lucia got off the bench at once. Gianni moved her behind him. I had the strange, sickening sensation of having stepped into a sentence that had begun long before I arrived. Lorenzo looked at me differently then, not as a problem, as a variable he had failed to account for. Perfect pitch, he asked. Yes. How much can you remember? Sounds. Or mistakes. For the first time, his mouth almost became a smile. Both. Lorenzo, he had seen beautiful women use fear like perfume. He had seen clever women perform helplessness because men mistook it for softness. Adriana Bellini did neither. She stood in his music room in borrowed cashmere and splints, pale from pain, and heard the wrong note in a hidden bug before 3 armed men noticed the room itself had changed. The scent of rosin still clung to her skin. It had no business undoing him the way it did. By afternoon, the East Wing was under security review. Rocco wanted me moved to another floor. Bianca wanted me sedated. Mara wanted to burn the borrowed sweater I'd snagged on a nail in the workroom. Nico wanted lunch and justice. I'm telling you, he said at the long kitchen table, glaring at a plate of grilled chicken. If a man cannot salt his food, he becomes vulnerable to communism. Mara slapped a spoon into his hand. Eat your sadness quietly, he looked at me. Do you see how she courts me? Through abuse, I offered. Exactly, he sighed. One day she'll recognize my heart. Or my resting triglycerides. Even Bianca laughed. I should have felt like an outsider watching other people's odd domestic cruelties. Instead, I felt something worse. I felt included. That evening, when Lorenzo found me in the practice room listening to Lucia fight with scales, he stood in the doorway and asked, What else do you remember from last night? I looked at my splinted fingers, at the shape they had become, at the life they had interrupted. Then I said the dangerous thing. I remember Carlo asking if I still had the music. The room went silent around us. Someone, somewhere below, shut a heavy door. And I knew I had just made everything worse. The words sat between us like a lit fuse. Carlo asked if I still had the music. Lorenzo did not lunge forward. He did not demand it. He simply closed the practice room door behind him with one controlled movement that made the latch sound much louder than metal ought to sound. Lucia looked from him to me and slipped out without being told. Smart girl. Gianni remained by the workbench. Rocco took position near the window. I hated how quickly I had learned what all these men looked like when danger entered a room. What music? Lorenzo asked. I wished he were the kind of man who barked. It would have been easier to resist. I don't know. Adriana. My name in his mouth was somehow more intimate than the nickname. Wrong answer again. I took a breath. 2 weeks ago, Carlo booked me for a private game in Tribeca. I only took it because my mother's clinic raised the price and I had no money to say no. No one moved. Outside the practice room, footsteps passed and faded. Inside, the only sound was the old house settling around us. Lorenzo's gaze stayed on me. Go on. There were 6 men at the table, I said. No cards, just whiskey, cigars, and a string quartet they wanted to ignore while they talked. Carlo kept a folder open beside him. I thought it was a contract. And it was. I shook my head. It was sheet music, Gianni frowned. Actual notation. Yes, or something pretending to be. Measures marked with shipment dates. Repeats where there shouldn't have been repeats. Whole note rests beside numbers. At first I thought it was a joke. Rocco's expression sharpened. A code. I looked at Lorenzo. Carlo saw me looking, he smiled. Then one page slid off the table and under my chair. "Did you take it?" Lorenzo asked. "No," I swallowed. "I memorized it." That landed harder than if I'd said yes. Gianni let out a low breath through his nose, half admiration, half dismay. "Of course you did." "I didn't think it mattered," I said. It was wrong, the notation." It bothered me. Nico appeared in the doorway at exactly the wrong moment, carrying a plate of celery sticks, with the expression of a condemned man. "If anyone needs me, I'll be in the kitchen writing a will that mentions every unsalted injustice committed against me." Mara's voice snapped from somewhere behind him. "Eat the celery, Greco." He saw the room, the faces, the fact that no one laughed, and lifted the plate solemnly. "On second thought, I will take my grief elsewhere." He retreated. Even then, absurdly, I wanted to laugh. Lorenzo's attention never left me. "Recite it. The whole thing, all of it." So I did. I gave them the false title at the top of the page, then the key signature, then the sequence of notes disguised as inventory counts. 4 containers, Red Hook, 23 crates. A date 2 nights away. A change in route marked by a coda sign. By the time I finished, Rocco had taken out his phone. Gianni had gone pale beneath the olive tone of his skin. Lorenzo had not moved at all. "That route is one of ours," Rocco said. Lorenzo looked at him. "Was." The single word dropped like a blade. I became suddenly aware of what I had done. "I didn't keep it from you on purpose." "No," Lorenzo said. "You kept it because you didn't know who to trust." His tone should have been neutral. Somehow it was. There was no offense in it, only a recognition so exact it unsettled me. Gianni gathered Lucia's abandoned scale book from the bench and set it aside. "Tommaso used coded ledgers 30 years ago," he said quietly. "Music then, too." Lorenzo's jaw went hard. I looked between them. "Tommaso?" "My uncle," Lorenzo said. He said nothing else, but something in the room told me not to ask the question forming in my mouth. "Not yet." Rocco stepped closer. "We need to move her." "I'm still standing right here," I said. "And if Tommaso believes you can reconstruct the page," Lorenzo replied, "he won't stop at broken fingers next time." That stung because of the truth in it. He gave Rocco instructions in low Italian. Cars, warehouse, men at both river exits. Then he looked back at me as if remembering I was more than the intelligence I had just handed him. "Come with me." It wasn't a request. He led me out of the practice room and down the back corridor to a narrow stone stairwell lit by one tall window and a brass sconce. Away from the others, the house sounded different, more ancient, less controlled. River wind touched the glass. Somewhere below us a door shut. I stopped on the landing. "Why are you helping me?" He turned. For a second neither of us spoke. I noticed the small crescent scar near his thumb again, the faint silver line along his jaw I had missed before. The exhaustion banked so deep beneath his calm that only the right light revealed it. "Because I should have helped sooner once already," he said. "That was all. It should not have been enough." It was. I took one careful step down and pain shot from my hand to my shoulder. My breath caught. Before I could pretend otherwise, Lorenzo was in front of me, one hand braced on the wall beside my head, the other hovering near my elbow without touching. "Stop, I'm fine. You're becoming repetitive." The laugh that escaped me was startled and soft and somehow dangerous. His eyes dropped to my mouth for one fraction too long. That was the first almost. It sat there between us, his hand near my waist, my back to cold stone, the whole stairwell narrowed to breath and stillness, and the scent of his cologne layered over night air and gun oil. Then he lifted my injured hand with impossible care, not enough to hurt, just enough to study the bandage. When his thumb brushed the inside of my wrist, I felt it everywhere. He went still. So did I. The rosin scent on my skin rose between us, warm from my pulse. Something dark passed through his expression, not hunger exactly. Memory sharpened into pain. He released me first. "You won't play for a while," he said, voice rougher than before. "I know. What are you when you're not playing?" The question stripped me more cleanly than flirting would have. "I don't know," I admitted. His gaze held mine. "That," he said quietly, "is the part I dislike." The protectiveness in it scared me more than anger would have. Below us, Nico's voice floated up from the kitchen. "Mara, if I die in this house, tell my mother I was denied cheese with dignity." Mara shouted back, "If you die in this house, it will be because I finally did it myself." The moment cracked. I stepped away first, heart tripping over itself for reasons I refused to name. Lorenzo did not stop me. But when we reached the bottom of the stairs, he opened the door with his body between mine and the hall beyond, shielding without making a show of it. Tenderness inside violence. I felt it. Worse, I recognized it. By nightfall, his men had found the warehouse empty and one truck burned at the dock. Someone had moved the shipment before they arrived. At dinner, nobody mentioned the fact that my memory had saved them from one loss and failed to prevent another. Nobody needed to. It sat at the table with us anyway. Later, as I stood alone at the guest room sink trying to wash rosin from my good hand, I heard two men talking in the corridor. "Leak had to be internal," one said. Rocco answered too softly for the first few words, then, clear enough to freeze my blood, "Or she warned them." I looked up into the mirror. And for the first time since Lorenzo's car door shut on my old life, I understood that being under his protection did not mean being believed. Not yet. The next morning, the house watched me. Not obviously. Men like Rocco obviously did nothing, but doors were slower to open. Conversations ended when I entered. Even Lucia, who had decided overnight that I was either interesting or contagious, studied me over breakfast as if trying to solve a difficult measure. Bianca noticed before I said anything. "Ignore them, easy for you to say. I live here by choice," she said. "You only live here by current bad luck." I stared at the coffee in my cup. "Did you choose it?" She was quiet long enough to make the question feel rude. "Yes," she said at last. "After my husband died, I chose this house because the grief was already here." It matched. That answer stayed with me. By noon, Gianni had moved my violin to the green felt room beside his workshop, where instruments went to be repaired under better light than people usually got. He laid out blank manuscript paper, sharpened pencils, and my old enemy, silence. "You're going to reconstruct the page," he said. I already told Lorenzo what I remembered. "You told him the useful parts. There are always useful parts people forget when they're frightened." He was right, which annoyed me, so I sat. My splinted left hand rested useless beside the paper, while I wrote with my right, filling staves with the false melody Carlo had used as cover. But the more I copied, the more I heard what was behind it, not just shipment counts, but patterns, recurring intervals marking names. A sequence of diminished chords that mapped to port officials on a payoff list. Gianni leaned over my shoulder once and let out a low whistle. "Little saint." "I'm not a saint." "No. But you are wasted on honest people." By late afternoon, Lorenzo came in without knocking. The room changed shape around him the way it always did. He read the pages in silence. I watched his face only because I pretended not to. "You found names," he said. "I found music made by someone who hated music." "That sounds like my uncle." My gaze lifted. "Tommaso." He set the pages down with exact care. "He taught me numbers before he taught me mercy." There it was again, one fact with a whole graveyard beneath it. I looked at his hands. He had braced them on Gianni's worktable without seeming to realize it. One knuckle had gone white, not from anger, from control. "What happened to the woman?" I asked before caution caught up. He did not pretend not to understand. "Which one?" "The one you didn't help soon enough." For a long second I thought he would leave. Instead he said, "She played piano." Nothing moved in the room. Tommaso suspected her husband of stealing. He made an example of the wrong body. My throat tightened. "Her hands." A nod. I could not think of anything to say that would not sound either childish or cruel, so I said nothing. Lorenz looked at my splinted fingers, and something shuddered behind his eyes. I was young enough to believe hesitation was not the same as consent. The sentence landed like a stone, dropped down a well too deep to hear the bottom. I reached out without thinking and touched the back of his hand with the tips of my good fingers. That was the second almost. Not a kiss, Not even comfort, exactly. Just skin to skin. Warmth where there had only been control. He froze. Every instinct in me screamed to remove my hand. I didn't, for one breath. Two. Then the door opened hard enough to break whatever had gathered there. Rocco stepped in. "We have a problem." Lorenzo straightened at once. The hand I had touched became a weapon again before my eyes. "What? Your guest's apartment." He looked at me. Tossed, thoroughly, a neighbor saw two men leaving before dawn. My stomach dropped. "My scores." "We recovered some," Rocco said. "They weren't looking for valuables. They were looking for the music," Gianni said. Rocco's gaze flicked to the manuscript pages on the table, or for proof she still had it. I stood too quickly. "I told you I didn't. No one's accusing you. That sounds exactly like an accusation." Lorenzo cut across us. "Enough." He turned to me. "What else was in the apartment?" "Nothing worth stealing," I swallowed. "My father's metronome, letters, my conservatory application." "Where?" "Top drawer." "Why?" Rocco pulled a clear evidence sleeve from inside his jacket. In it lay a photograph, not of me, of my brother Matteo leaving school. On the back, in block print, "Trade the score for the boy." I sat down because my legs stopped believing in themselves. Bianca found me an hour later in the chapel at the far end of the house, where even the air smelled older than fear. Beeswax, stone, and winter lilies left too long in water. I had not meant to come there. My feet had simply followed the first quiet place they found. She sat beside me without speaking. "My brother is 14, I said finally. "He thinks our father was a taxi driver who died tired. If he learns the truth, he'll hate my mother for the right reasons and me for the wrong ones." Bianca folded her gloved hands. "And the truth is, my father ran books for Carlo. When he tried to leave, he disappeared." My voice shook once. "I found the code because I grew up hearing numbers hidden in songs. He used to test me at the kitchen table. I thought it was a game. There, it was out, my secret, ugly and inherited." Bianca did not recoil. "Did Lorenzo know?" "No, he does now." She tipped her head slightly toward the chapel door. I turned. He stood there in the threshold, having heard enough, maybe all of it. His expression gave me nothing, which somehow hurt more than anger would have. I rose, every nerve exposed. "You said no one was accusing me." "I was. Do you think I brought this to your house on purpose?" "No. Then why do you look at me like that?" His gaze moved over my face. Stopped at the tears I had not agreed to produce, and lowered as if that sight cost him. "Because," he said quietly, "I know what it means when a child learns crime as music before she learns it as danger." The recognition in his voice undid me. I looked away first. That night, Lorenzo stationed two men outside Matteo's school, moved my mother again, and put the reconstructed score in the family safe. None of that calmed me. What did was smaller, and therefore worse. When Mara brought me a fresh wrap for my hand, the cloth smelled faintly of violin rosin. "He asked Gianni to keep your case in this room," she said, pretending not to watch my face. "Said you'd sleep easier if you could see it." I did not ask who he was. I didn't need to. And down the hall, behind a closed office door, Lorenzo began searching his own house for the person who had known too much, too soon. Betrayal had entered the walls. War did not arrive with sirens. It arrived with flowers. White orchids came to the estate in a black box addressed to me on the third morning after the photograph. No card. Just silk petals, cold tissue paper, and a broken violin string coiled at the bottom like a threat. Mara carried the box into the breakfast room using 2 fingers, as if it might explode from bad manners alone. "If one more criminal sends botany into this house, I'm charging handling fees." Nico, who was trying to peel a boiled egg with the drama of a widow at sea, looked at the contents and blanched. I knew orchids were sinister. Bianca took the string out carefully. "E-string," Gianni's face turned grave. "The highest one, the one that snaps nearest the eye." Lorenzo did not touch the flowers. He looked at me. "Tommaso?" I asked. "Yes." The answer should have made me feel colder. Instead, it made everything too sharp. The china against the table, the butter knife near Nico's plate, the faint medicinal smell of Bianca's gloves. Known danger was easier to breathe than doubt. Rocco entered with a phone pressed to his ear. The harbor contact is dead. The room changed. Lorenzo stood. How? Single shot, car still running. Nico muttered, fantastic. I haven't even finished my tragic egg. Nobody smiled this time. By evening, Lorenzo insisted on moving Lucia, Gianni, Bianca, and me to the gallery floor, an interior level with reinforced doors and no exterior windows. For one night, he said. That's what men like you always say right before 3 weeks vanish, I replied. His gaze touched my face, then my splinted hand. One night, I believed him and didn't know why. The gallery floor smelled of oil paint and old varnish. Lorenzo's mother's portraits lined the hall. Stern women, velvet backgrounds, mouths that had never laughed in public. He put me in a sitting room connected to his office by a private door that stayed locked on his side. I noticed that immediately. Of course I did. The evening stretched. Rain began after dark, tapping at distant glass somewhere above us. Lucia played cards with Nico and cheated openly. Gianni repaired a bridge on a mandolin no one admitted to owning. Mara brought soup and told Nico if he put extra salt in it, she would file a report with his mother. You have my mother on speed dial, he asked, horrified. I have everyone on speed dial. That, he said solemnly to me, is not romance, it is surveillance with eyeliner. Even I laughed at that. Lorenzo, passing through the room with Rocco at his shoulder, heard it. He stopped. Not long. A moment. But long enough that the warmth in my chest became its own kind of problem. Later, unable to sleep, I went looking for water and found the private door to his office cracked open. Light spilled through. I should have walked away. Instead, I knocked once with my knuckles. Come in, he said. His office was all dark wood and disciplined violence. Maps, ledgers, a decanter untouched on the sideboard, a gun lying beside an open folder like another writing instrument. He stood at the far desk with his jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled, tie gone entirely. A white scar crossed the inside of his forearm, old and ugly, disappearing under the cuff. I stared before I could help it. His eyes followed mine. Knife. The single word held no explanation. It didn't need one. I wasn't asking. No, he said. You were worrying. I don't worry about you. Little fury. There was less mockery in it now, more something else. I took the glass of water from the sideboard because my hands needed employment. You haven't slept. Neither have you. Outside the office, the house breathed in long, expensive silences. In here it felt smaller, more dangerous, more honest. Why do you keep stopping? I asked before I could stop myself. His expression did not change. Stopping what? This. I made a helpless motion that included the room, the air, the fact that he was standing 3 feet away and somehow taking up all available oxygen. Whatever keeps happening and then doesn't. For the first time since I'd met him, Lorenzo looked almost caught off guard. Then his face closed. Because you're hurt. That's not the only reason. No, he said softly. It is. That was almost the 3rd time. He came toward me slowly, not like a hunter this time, but like a man approaching a frightened animal he refused to frighten further. He took the glass from my good hand and set it aside. His fingers brushed mine. Heat flashed through me so suddenly I went still. I could ruin this, he said, the honesty in it shook me. But you haven't, I whispered. His eyes lowered to my mouth and stayed there one impossible second. Then, too, a gunshot broke the window in the outer hall. Everything shattered. Lorenzo moved so fast my brain never caught up. One arm wrapped around my waist and drove me behind the desk before the second shot punched into the doorframe. Glass rained somewhere beyond. Men shouted. Lucia screamed once, cut off. Nico roared something profane and heartfelt about ducking. Lorenzo drew the gun from the desk and fired twice toward the hall without exposing more than his wrist. Efficient. Terrifying. Beautiful in the worst way. Stay down, he ordered. I had no intention of doing anything else, but another cry came from outside Bianca, I thought, and instinct overran fear. I crawled to the desk edge and listened. 3 sets of footsteps, one limping, one heavy, one closing from the left. Left side, I said. Lorenzo looked at me sharply. Different heels strike, I whispered. He nodded once, rose in a violent blur, and shot the man coming through the left arch before the intruder finished turning his weapon. The house answered with chaos. Rocco and other guards flooded the corridor. Nico appeared hauling Lucia behind him with one arm and clutching a silver serving tray in the other. I panicked artistically, he announced, using the tray as a shield. Do not judge me, Mara, behind him with a pistol in hand, said. I'm judging you a lot. Then I saw the blood, not mine. Lorenzo's. A line of red ran down from the edge of his hair into his collar. Not a lot, enough. Sit down, I said. He ignored me. I stood anyway, crossed the broken glass floor before anyone could stop me, and caught his sleeve with my good hand. You're bleeding. His whole body went taut at the contact. It's nothing. It's on your neck. The room full of armed men vanished. He looked at me. I looked back. Neither of us remembered how to step away. Then, very carefully, he bent his head. Permission. I touched the cut with the corner of my sleeve. My fingers shook, not from fear. That was the awful part. I had just seen what he became when violence was required, and some piece of me had moved closer instead of away. Lorenz, it was not her face that undid him. It was the tremor in the hand that still reached for him. The same girl who had bled through a performance to shield a younger musician now stood in broken glass, touching his throat after watching him kill. That was it. That had always been it. She did not make room for fear where someone else needed saving. When everyone else finally scattered to secure the house, he took me into the small archive room and locked the door. Are you hurt? He asked. No, don't lie to me now. I'm not. My breathing was still uneven. Are you? Adriana. It was the first time he had said my name like that. I looked at him and something in me gave way. I was afraid, I admitted. Not of you, of how relieved I was when it was you. His eyes closed for half a second. Then he lifted my good hand and pressed his mouth to my knuckles. Not a kiss meant to seduce. Not possession. Reverence almost. Restraint barely surviving itself. War's here, he said against my skin. I knew it before he let me go. After the attack, the house stopped pretending I was a guest. Reinforced glass went into the east wing by noon. Rocco doubled the rotations. Mara packed emergency bags for everyone with the efficiency of a woman who had done it before and hated how good she was at it. Lucia stopped asking casual questions and started carrying a small pocket knife Bianca definitely knew about and definitely chose not to confiscate. The strange thing was that none of that hurt me as much as Lorenzo's distance. He became gentler and less reachable all at once. He checked my bandages himself one morning without comment, thumb ghosting over the edge of the tape, then spent the rest of the day in meetings I was not allowed near. He made sure I ate. He did not touch me again. Every restraint felt louder after the archive room. By the third day, I wanted to shake him. By the fourth, I wanted to do worse. Instead, I spent my hours in Gianni's workshop, helping one-handed where I could. Sorting pegs, labeling varnished tins, listening while he told me stories about Cremonese wood and bad tenors. He had a way of making silence feel like shelter. You're in love with him, he said mildly over a cracked viola bridge. I dropped the packet of strings. No, I'm not. Excellent. Then you'll only suffer a little. Gianni, he smiled without lifting his head. Child, I am old, do not insult me with poor lies, I should have argued. Instead I asked, did his mother love this life? Gianni's hands paused. No, she loved her son. The distinction lodged under my ribs. That evening, the price of being close to Lorenzo arrived with no warning at all. Gianni and I were crossing the side courtyard toward the chapel after supper. He wanted to show me a carved music stand his wife had once commissioned, when the first shot cracked from the roofline. He shoved me down so hard my knees tore against stone. The second shot hit him. The sound he made was small, more surprise than pain. I screamed his name. Men exploded out of doors. Lorenzo's voice cut through the courtyard like a blade. Inside, now. But Gianni was bleeding in my hands, blood soaking through his cardigan, warm and impossible. I pressed down where Bianca later told me I should have. I remember that. I remember rosin still clinging faintly to my skin from touching a bow that afternoon and the way it mixed sickeningly with iron. "Don't you dare," I said to him, though I had no authority over death. Gianni looked at me with infuriating calm. "You hold pressure like a musician, very dramatic." Then he coughed blood onto the chapel steps. Bianca took over. Lorenzo dragged me backward by the waist when I fought her for the space. His hands were iron. His breathing was. "Adriana, let go of me. No, I can help. He needs Bianca." "I hate you," I said, because I needed the sentence to hurt someone. His face changed as if I'd struck him. He released me at once. Gianni lived. The bullet missed his heart by what Bianca later described as a margin available only to people too stubborn for God to process efficiently. He went into surgery in the house's medical suite while the rest of us waited in a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and old plaster. Nico sat beside me with a bag of frozen peas against his own forehead. "You were shot too?" I asked blankly. "Serving platter ricochet," he said mournfully. "Do you know how humiliating it is to survive a firefight and then get concussed by cutlery?" Despite everything, a broken laugh escaped me. He looked relieved, then guilty for being relieved. "He'll make it," he said softly, meaning Gianni. I wanted to believe him. Near dawn, Mara put a passport in my lap. I stared at the false name inside. Elena Rossi. "There's a car in 40 minutes, she said. "Nico drives you to Teterboro. Bianca arranged a clinic in Montreal for your hand and a conservatory contact who owes Gianni 3 favors and a kidney." I looked up slowly. "Lorenzo knows." Mara's mouth flattened. "He ordered it." Something in my chest went cold and very still. "He's sending me away. He's trying to keep you alive. That isn't the same thing." "No," she said. "It never is." At the airport gate, dawn made everything look temporary. Wet tarmac, private jet. Nico in a dark coat, holding 2 coffees, and the expression of a man attending his own emotional funeral. "I would like it noted," he said, "that if we are caught in traffic because of your tragic romantic indecision, I will develop a stress rash." I took the coffee and didn't drink it. My phone vibrated. "Not Lorenzo. Lucia, come back. HES going alone." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Nico saw my face and swore under his breath. "That child is a menace." "What did she mean?" He looked toward the jet, then away. "Tommaso requested a private meet at St. Bartholomew's Warehouse Chapel. Old family nonsense. Your memorized score gives Lorenzo leverage. But Tommaso has judges, port police, half a crew from Brooklyn, and a martyr complex. Lorenzo thinks if you're gone, he can do what he has to do without. Without what? Without becoming a man I can't come back from," his silence said. The choice opened beneath my feet then. Real and terrible. Leave. Save my hand, my mother, my brother, the person I had been before Lorenzo Vitelli looked at my blood and knew what it meant. Or go back. Walk toward the exact darkness I now understood clearly. Not because I was trapped, because I was choosing him with open eyes. My old conservatory acceptance email was still in the passport sleeve, printed by Mara in case I needed reminding of what a different life looked like. Berlin, spring term. Room in a student residence with thin walls and bad heating. Practice rooms at midnight. Ordinary loneliness. Honest hunger. I thought of Gianni on the chapel steps. Of Lucia pretending not to be afraid. Of Lorenzo bending his head so I could touch the blood at his throat. Of the way safety felt frightening only because it had come from him. I put the passport on the hood of the car. "Nico," he closed his eyes, "please don't say what I think you're about to say. My cardiologist mother already blames this family for my resting pulse. Take me back." He looked at me for a long time. Then he sighed like a saint accepting doomed work. "Myra is going to call me a romantic and I'll never recover." Leaving was possible. I walked away from it myself. The jet door closed without me, and the life I might have had taxied toward the morning without turning back. The estate felt wrong the moment we returned. Not loud, not obviously broken. Wrong in the way an instrument felt wrong when one peg had been turned a hair while your back was turned. The guards at the gate stood where they should. The front hall gleamed. Somewhere upstairs, a vacuum cleaner droned with insulting normalcy. Still, every nerve in me tightened. Nico parked under the port-catcher and killed the engine. You stay beside me. Has that ever worked once? Today would be a wonderful day to begin. Inside, Mara met us at the side corridor, face like weather before lightning. He's gone, my pulse lurched. To the warehouse? She nodded. An hour ago, Rocco with him. Something cold slid into place. Rocco, I repeated. Mara's eyes narrowed. What? I thought of the bug in the chandelier. The warehouse moved before Lorenzo arrived. My apartment was searched before dawn. The exact route of the airport transfer is known to no one but the inner circle. The evidence is in Rocco's hand. They practiced calmly. He knew too much, I said. Too early. Every time. Mara swore once, viciously. Nico already had his phone out. He never got to finish dialing. The lights died. Not all at once. The house coughed into darkness wing by wing, generator delay stretching 1 second too long. In that blank pocket of silence, a hand clamped over my mouth from behind. It was a bit hard, elbowed backward, hit muscle, someone cursed near my ear. Nico, Mara shouted. Gunfire answered from the front corridor, men running, glass breaking, a body hitting the floor. Then I was hauled sideways through a service door I had never noticed, down 2 steps, and into the metal throat of a freight elevator. Rocco's voice came from behind me, breathless but controlled. Easy. I went still from shock more than obedience. The emergency light painted his face blood red. You, I said. He looked almost sorry. That infuriated me more than hatred would have. Tommaso wants the original score. I don't have it. He thinks you do. The elevator dropped. I kicked his shin. He caught my wrists, bound them with a zip tie, and shoved me against the wall hard enough that my shoulder rang. Don't force me to hurt you. You already did. A flicker in his eyes, regret. Genuine, useless. I warned you away from him, he said, more than once. You accused me in the hallway, to keep suspicion off myself. I laughed once, sharp and ugly. How generous. The elevator opened into the service tunnel under the estate. Concrete, damp air, diesel, and river mold. We moved fast. Rocco half-dragged me toward a waiting van, while gunfire echoed overhead like rain through pipes. You were loyal to Lorenzo, I said, stalling because terrified people measured time in words. I was loyal to a boy, Rocco said. Tommaso has my son. Everything in me jerked. You have a son. In Naples, 11, his jaw clenched. Tommaso promised release, new papers. Then Lorenzo started looking too closely. Gray, not clean, exactly as terrible as that. The van sped through old tunnel roads beneath the river district. I counted turns by instinct. Left, right. Long incline, metal grating, 2 stops. I listened to the engine pitch, to the rattle in the rear hinge, to the foghorns above us. If I could not fight him, I could remember him. At the warehouse, Tommaso Vitelli waited in the private chapel, built into the top floor, because of course men like that needed altars close to commerce. He was older than Lorenzo by 20 years and resembled him the way a knife resembled surgery. Same bones, same dark eyes, but Tommaso wore his calm like contempt. No grief underneath, no breaks. He looked at my hand first, smiled. Ah, he said, there's the little musician. I wanted to spit at him. I settled for silence. They told me you were pretty, he went on. What interested my nephew was clearly your temperament. Rocco cut my wrists free only to tie me to a wooden chair near the chapel rail. The room smelled of candle wax, damp stone, and old incense failing to cover mold. River wind hissed against stained glass. I don't have your page, I said. Tommaso sat opposite me. No. You have something worse, a conscience. He laid a folder on his knee and opened it. Inside were photographs. Matteo at school, my mother entering the clinic, Lucia stepping out of a car at the estate. I stopped breathing. You hear patterns, he said. So hear this one. Every person you care for becomes leverage. That is what Lorenzo still fails to understand. He mistakes attachment for strength. The villain mirror. Even then I saw it. Tommaso was what Lorenzo would become if nothing tender remained in him to resist usefulness as the only law. I won't help you, I said. You already did. Lorenzo's men are repositioning as we speak based on what you remember. He leaned in. The difference between my nephew and me, child, is that he still believes sparing you makes him superior. It only makes him weak. I thought of Lorenzo in broken glass, of his mouth against my knuckles, of the 3 times he had stopped. I looked Tommaso straight in the face. If he were like you, I'd already be dead. That earned me the first real expression I had seen from him, not rage, interest. He rose and crossed to the old chapel organ in the corner. Do you know what your father begged for before he disappeared? Ice flooded my chest. He asked for his daughter's hearing to be left untouched. Said it was a gift. Tommaso rested one finger on a yellowed key. Imagine loving one thing about your child enough to negotiate with devils over it. I did not know if he lied. That was the cruelty of men like him. They used possible truths because certainty hurt less. When he came back, he placed a tuning fork on the table beside me and struck it against the chair arm. A pure A sang through the room. I could take that from you, he said, piece by piece. He left me there after that, maybe to let the fear grow, maybe because he believed it already had. He was wrong. Once the door shut, I breathed through the panic and listened. Footsteps outside. 2 men, 1 smoker. I heard the lighter wheel. Freight winch overhead at regular intervals. Foghorn closer now. We were on the upper riverside. A train horn, 3 low blasts, the old Jersey freight line. Then I heard something else, a drip in the far corner. Consistent, hollow under it. Cistern room. When the guard came in to check the knots, I dropped my chin and whispered, "Your right boot squeaks." He frowned. "Bad leather," I said. "You'll slip on the west stairs." He looked down automatically. I kicked the chair backward into his knees. The tuning fork hit the stone. I caught it with bound fingers and drove the sharp stem into the zip tie, sawing my wrists raw until one loop gave. The door outside banged open. Shouting, gunfire, running feet. It was too late and was coming fast. The first man through the door was not Lorenzo. It was Nico. He burst in sideways with a gun in one hand and, inexplicably, a bloodied fire extinguisher in the other. "Good news," he said breathlessly. "I'm alive." "Bad news, I have done enough cardio today to legally sue someone." I made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He crossed the room and cut the rest of the tie from my wrists. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Excellent, because my heroics peak in very short intervals." Gunfire cracked in the corridor behind him. Mara shouted something obscene in Sicilian. Then Lorenzo entered. I had thought I was prepared for what relief would feel like. I was. He was blood on black wool, jaw set like judgment, eyes so dark they made the chapel candles look weak. For one suspended second, he just looked at me, standing, untied, shaking but upright. Not broken. Everything in his face changed and didn't. The rage remained. Something more raw moved under it. I went to him, no speech, no carefulness. I crossed the stone and hit his chest hard enough that he had to catch me or let us both fall. His arms closed around me with frightening force. My face pressed to his collar. He smelled like rain, smoke, and that colder layer beneath his cologne, night air and metal and the outside of violence. "You came back," he said into my hair. "You sent me away." "I know." His hand slid to the back of my neck and stayed there one extra heartbeat before he set me behind him and turned toward the altar. Tommaso stood at the far end of the chapel steps with 2 men left and a pistol low at his thigh. Rocco was beside him, face gray, gun lowered, as if he had already discovered there was no such thing as a bargain with a man like this. "You were late," Tommaso told Lorenzo. "I was busy killing the men you left at my gate." Tommaso smiled faintly. "You always did confuse efficiency with morality." The words struck harder because they sounded rehearsed, old. "Family language." Lorenzo took one step up. "Release the boy," Tommaso's brows lifted. "Rocco's son, already done, hours ago, Naples airport, papers in hand." Rocco stared. I said many things." Rocco's face emptied. He understood before the rest of us did. Tommaso had never needed the child tonight, only the betrayal. Rocco raised his gun then, not at Lorenzo. At Tommaso. He did not get the chance. Tommaso shot him through the throat without shifting his expression. Rocco dropped at the foot of the chapel steps, making a terrible wet sound I would hear later in my sleep. For one frozen instant, no one moved. I had hated him. I still did. And yet the sight of him dying with his son's name trapped behind blood felt like another theft laid at Tommaso's feet. Nico whispered, "I hate family reunions." Then the room exploded. Lorenzo shoved me behind a carved pillar as bullets split wood from the pews. Mara fired from the side aisle. Nico lunged for cover, muttering prayers and dietary regrets. One of Tommaso's men went down against the organ pipes. I pressed my back to stone and listened. Left side empty, one man limping near the confessional. Tommaso reloading slower than the others. Old wrist injury, maybe. Lorenzo moved in the pauses, never in the noise, using silence as cover the way other men used smoke. A shape appeared at the side aisle with a gun lifted toward Lorenzo's blind spot. I didn't think. The tuning fork was still in my sleeve. I threw it. Ridiculous weapon. Perfect sound. It struck the stained glass panel above the shooter's head and shattered it. He flinched instinctively toward the crash. Lorenzo turned and dropped him in the same heartbeat. He looked at me once across the chapel. Surprise first, then something dangerously like pride. Lorenzo, she should have been cowering. Any sane woman would have been. Instead, Adriana watched angles, tracked footsteps, and threw a tuning fork-like judgment to save his life. He had been wrong about one thing only. He thought protecting her meant keeping her from the dark. The truth was uglier. She could stand in it, and once she chose to, it would mark them both forever. The last of Tommaso's men fell near the altar rail. Smoke fouled the chapel air. Candles tipped and guttered wax across old stone. Somewhere below us, sirens began to rise from the river streets. Tommaso backed toward the side sacristy with his pistol trained on Lorenzo. "You still stop short," he said. "That was always your weakness." Lorenzo answered by advancing. I saw the shot before he did, not Tommaso's, but the reflection in the brass candle stand from the mirror panel beside the door. Another man hidden in the sacristy, waiting. "Lorenzo!" He turned on the warning, and the bullet meant for his spine tore through his shoulder instead. He staggered, caught himself on the pew end, and kept moving like pain was an administrative detail. I ran before anyone could stop me. Straight through gun smoke and candlelight to where he was still upright by a miracle and rage. "Adriana, get down." "No." Tommaso looked from me to him and smiled with sudden understanding. "There it is." He raised the pistol. Lorenzo stepped in front of me fully, using his body as a wall. That was when I knew with perfect, devastating clarity that if he died here, something essential in me would not regrow. Mara's shot clipped Tommaso's wrist. The gun spun. Lorenzo hit him a second later, both men crashing into the first pew hard enough to split the rail. It was not a fight so much as an argument held in bone. Family made brutal. Tommaso went for Lorenzo's wound. Lorenzo answered with the kind of efficiency that made pity irrelevant. Nico pulled me backward when I tried to go closer. "Absolutely not. You are already the reason I'll need medication before 40. On the altar steps, Lorenzo got both hands around his uncle's throat and stopped, not because he couldn't finish it. Because he still had to decide what finishing it would make him. Tommaso laughed, blood at his teeth. "Do it, nephew, or she dies for your hesitation later." The chapel went very quiet. Lorenzo looked at him, then at me, then back again. In that silence, all of us knew one of us might not survive what came next. Nobody spoke, nobody breathed. Tommaso smiled up at him as if death were a lesson, and Lorenzo was still a boy in need of one. I could see the moment Lorenzo understood there would be no clean version of victory. No arrest. No surrender. No decent lie he could tell himself later about alternatives. He let go of Tommaso's throat only long enough to drag him to his knees on the chapel floor. Blood ran dark from Lorenzo's shoulder into his shirt. His face had gone pale beneath the olive of his skin, but his hands were steady. Always the hands. "Get her out," he said to Nico without looking at me. "No," I said instantly. His gaze cut to mine, wounded, furious, alive. "Adriana, I'm not leaving you." Tommaso laughed again, ragged now. There, you wanted devotion, enjoy what it costs. Something in Lorenzo's expression hardened into finality. You taught me numbers, he said to his uncle. You taught me fear. You taught me how quickly a room goes quiet when cruelty pays better than kindness. Tommaso spat blood at the stone. And it made you powerful. No, Lorenzo's voice dropped. It made me empty. The words struck the chapel harder than any bullet. Tommaso's smile thinned. Then you're weaker than I thought. Lorenzo did not answer with philosophy. He drew the knife from inside his jacket, narrow, practical, the handle worn from years. And for one suspended instant, I saw the boy he had been vanish completely behind the man he had become. Then he ended it, efficiently, no spectacle, no speech. The knife went in under the ribs where the heart would fail fastest. Tommaso's breath left him in a shocked little sound. Lorenzo held him there until the fight left his body, until the old monster slumped against the broken pew and became merely a dead man in a ruined chapel. I did not look away. That mattered. I think he knew it mattered. Sirens grew louder below. Mara took control immediately, barking orders into 2 phones at once. Police to the river entrance only, family council to the east gate. Get that body covered. Get Rocco's body moved respectfully, or I will personally haunt all of you. Nico, pale but upright, leaned against a pillar and pressed his hand to a cut along his side. If anybody asks, I was magnificent. You were concussed with office equipment, Mara said, and yet alive. Grace takes many forms. Bianca and 2 men rushed in carrying a medical kit. The sight of Lorenzo's blood finally hit her composure where bullets had not. Sit down before I sedate you by force. I'm fine, he said. Everyone in this family lies identically. Sit. He sat because his body had reached its limit, and no amount of pride could renegotiate with blood loss forever. I knelt in front of him before thinking better of it. Bianca cut his shirt open at the shoulder. The wound was ugly but not fatal. Through and through. My hands shook so badly Bianca pushed gauze into my good one. Hold pressure here, I obeyed. Lorenzo hissed once through his teeth when I pressed down, then looked at me like the pain was happening somewhere much farther away than my face. It's over, I whispered, not sure whether I said it for him or myself. Not yet, but an hour later. After statements arranged, and lawyers deployed, and half the city already learning that Tommaso Vitelli had died, in what the papers would eventually call an internal criminal dispute, it finally was. Rocco did not survive long enough to ask forgiveness. Mara found proof in his phone that his son had indeed been released hours before the betrayal, which made the whole thing sadder rather than better. Gianni was stabilized but weak. Lucia cried only once, in Bianca's laundry room, where no one was meant to hear her. I heard anyway. The house heard. That was the thing about grief inside large walls, it traveled. At dawn, Lorenzo stood alone in the side courtyard where Gianni had been shot. His shoulder was bandaged. Rain had washed most of the blood from the stones, but not all. I went to him barefoot because every other choice felt theatrical. He did not turn until I was beside him. You shouldn't be outside, he said. You shouldn't be bleeding through fresh stitches. A weak line of almost amusement touched his mouth and vanished. We stood in the damp morning, with the chapel bells beginning somewhere beyond the river. The stone beneath my feet was cold enough to make me aware of every inch of myself. You watched, he said at last. Yes, you should hate me a little. I do, I looked at him, and I love you anyway. The words came out before I could improve or retract them. They were not graceful, they were true. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, whatever remained of restraint in him had changed shape. Not gone, never that. But altered by survival and cost, and the fact that I had just given him the one thing he never asked for directly. He lifted his uninjured hand to my face, touched just under my eye with his thumb, and said, You should have left. I know. Why didn't you? Because you stopped. Because you never used what frightened you about me against me. Because even when you sent me away, it was to save what was left of my life, not to keep me easy. I said only, you already know. His forehead rested against mine. That was not almost, not anymore. When he kissed me, it was slow enough to break me open. No urgency for urgency's sake, no demand. He paused twice, giving me time to move away if I wanted. I didn't. My good hand found the lapel of his coat. His mouth softened against mine on the smallest exhale, as if the fact that I stayed altered the entire world. When we finally drew back, I was trembling. "So am I," he said quietly, because he had felt it. That honesty felt more intimate than the kiss. Behind us, the courtyard doors opened. Nico froze halfway through carrying a tray of coffees. "I see nothing," he announced loudly to the dawn. "I am blind. My doctor says it's from stress." Mara took the tray from him and shoved him back inside by the shoulder. "Leave them alone, Greco." He reappeared for 1 second only to point at Lorenzo. "If you break her heart after I nearly died for this, I will salt all your food in revenge." Lorenzo actually smiled. "Just barely. It cost all of us something to get there." By noon, Tommaso was buried in family ground without fanfare. Rocco's son was placed under Gianni's legal protection from afar. And every ledger Tommaso ever hid in notation was turned over to the exact federal judge. He had spent a decade bribing through intermediaries who no longer had anyone left to protect them. Lorenzo burned the original reconstructed pages himself in the chapel brazier while I watched. No more codes, no more music made filthy. When the last ash curled in the heat, he looked at me across the smoke and finally said the words like a verdict delivered to himself. "It is over." Peace did not feel peaceful at first. It felt suspiciously quiet, like the house itself was listening for the next impact. In the weeks after Tommaso's death, lawyers multiplied, reporters hunted the gates, and Lorenzo slept less than any stitched shoulder should have allowed. Yet the estate slowly changed anyway. Guards laughed again in kitchens. Lucia practiced scales with the stubbornness of the newly unafraid. Gianni recovered enough to complain about hospital broth and the moral decline of factory varnish. Nico resumed his pursuit of Mara with renewed optimism and reduced sodium. "She touched my arm yesterday," he told me in the pantry with the solemnity of a man recounting divine visitation. "She was moving you out of the way of a flour sack. Intent is invisible to the unromantic." "Which one of us is unromantic?" I asked. He gave me a look so scandalized it became kind. "You. Obviously, you fell in love with a man who owns 6 kinds of silence and none of them are healthy." I laughed hard enough to startle myself. My hand healed crookedly, then stronger. The ring finger still protested in cold weather. I could play again by midsummer, though some shifts hurt and high vibrato fatigued faster than before. I cried the first day Gianni placed my violin back under my chin, and the note came out true anyway. Lorenz heard that from the hall and did not come in. Later, I found a new set of strings in my room. No note, just the exact brand I had used since conservatory. His way of speaking was still mostly made of not saying. By early autumn, I no longer lived in the guest wing. Nobody announced when that changed. My books simply began appearing in his library. My sweater remained draped over the chair in his room, long enough to lose all plausible deniability. One night I fell asleep in his bed while reading financial affidavits aloud in mock-dramatic voices, and after that there was no point pretending. He still stopped sometimes. That mattered to me more than whether he wanted to. If I tensed, he noticed. If I grew quiet in the wrong way, he changed the subject, moved slower, or simply held me with his face in my hair until my breathing steadied. His restraint had built the bridge between us. It remained part of the architecture. One evening in October, the first real cold came off the river. I found him in the West Kitchen, not the formal one, but the warm room where staff stole pastries and family arguments softened around soup. He stood at the counter staring down at a saucepan as if considering whether intimidation worked on tomatoes. "Are you cooking?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up, unoffended by the accusation. Attempting, the room smelled of garlic, basil, and something faintly scorched. I crossed to the stove. "You're burning the onions." "I had help." From the table, Nico raised a hand. "For the record, I said medium heat. Mara said I was genetically unsuited to instruction. Mara, shelling peas into a bowl, didn't look up. I stand by the diagnosis. I took the wooden spoon from Lorenzo's hand. That became another almost of a different kind, domestic, ridiculous, devastating. My shoulder brushing his chest in a kitchen lit by copper pans, his hand staying on the spoon a fraction too long before letting go. The awareness that ordinary life with him felt stranger than gunfire had. More stock, I said. Yes, chef, Nico said immediately. I wasn't talking to you. Cruelty. Everywhere, Lorenzo watched me stir. Gianni says the conservatory in Berlin renewed the offer. I went still. Mara and Nico both found reasons to become intensely interested in peas and cabinetry. Yes, I said, do you want it? The question was clean. No trap, no hidden order. I put the spoon down. Do you want me to go? No, simple as weather, heavy as law. I turned to face him fully. Then ask the right question. Something passed through his eyes then, surprise, respect, something softer than either. So he did. After dinner, he led me to the small music room off the library where Lucia had once played scales badly and Gianni had first listened to my silence. The piano had been tuned. A fire burned low. On the stand lay my father's metronome, recovered from the apartment wreckage and repaired, its brass pendulum gleaming under lamplight. I touched it and had to swallow hard before I could speak. How, Gianni? Of course. Lorenzo reached into his jacket, and for one absurd second I thought gun before reason restored itself. He drew out a small square box of dark green leather and set it on the piano lid between us. This is the part people do poorly, he said. Too many rehearsed words. A laugh slipped out of me, shaky and helpless. You're criticizing other people's romance. I'm criticizing theater. He paused. Adriana, I can offer protection and a house and enough money that your brother never bargains with hunger. Those things are easy for me. His voice changed slightly on the next part. Lower. Harder to say. What isn't easy, he said, is giving another person the exact place in my life from which she can destroy me and asking for that anyway. My eyes filled before I agreed to that. He looked at the tears, then away, like he always did when tenderness felt too exposed. I don't want to own your future, he said. I want to build one that includes your music, your family, your temper, your impossible conscience, and the way you still look at me as if I am not the worst thing in every room. A beat. Will you marry me, little fury? There it was. The nickname no longer cold, no observation. Home. I laughed and cried at once, which I was beginning to understand was a recurring condition with him. Yes, I whispered. Then, because his face had gone so still I knew he needed certainty stated plainly, I said it again. Yes, he opened the box. The ring was old, not flashy, a narrow band set with an heirloom diamond cut in a shape I had only seen in museums. Elegant and severe, and impossible to mistake for anything, but legacy offered carefully. When he slid it onto my finger, his hand shook once, only once. Afterward, we stood by the stove, eating the rescued pasta from warm bowls, while Nico loudly informed Mara that if she refused him forever, he would become a pale martyr in excellent loafers. Your loafers are terrible, Mara said. He looked at me, wounded. See, this is flirting in our culture. Across the kitchen, Lorenzo reached for my hand under the table, turned it palm up, and traced the ring with his thumb. No audience. No power play. Just touch. Something quiet and almost ordinary settled over the room. That was when I knew the proposal had done what war could not. It let the future in. 9 months later, the recital hall smelled of dust, velvet, and rosin. Not the expensive false polish of gala nights. The real thing, pine powder floating under stage heat. Wood warmed by bodies and nerves. Folding chairs in the wings. A violinist in the front row whispering scales under her breath because fear made children believe sound was stronger than silence. I loved it instantly. The Vitelli Foundation for Young Musicians had been Nico's accidental name and Gianni's deliberate project. Lorenzo funded it without letting anyone engrave his face on anything, which apparently counted as sainthood in his circles. We had taken over an old theater in Queens, restored the stage, paid for lessons, instruments, repairs, scholarships, and counseling for children whose gifts had too often been treated as luxuries instead of lifelines. Ordinary goodness, the most radical thing in the story. My hand still ached in rain. Some mornings the ring finger resisted stretches and needed slow coaxing over coffee. I never got back the exact innocence of movement I had before Carlo's case lid came down. But I played. And tonight, I wasn't the one performing first. Leah, older now, steadier, still too serious, tuned backstage beside a 12-year-old student named Rosa whose bow hand trembled so badly the hair clicked against the string. "You're gripping too hard," I told her gently. "I'm trying not to mess up. That's why you're messing up." She looked near tears. I remembered another girl in another room, trying not to look at blood on my fingers. So I crouched in front of Rosa and shifted slightly, using my body to block the view of the audience gathering through the curtain gap. "Look at me," I said. "Not them. Breathe on my count." Again, she did. When her E string slipped a little flat, I reached out with my right hand and tuned it by ear in one clean motion. My left still moved slower, but it moved. Rosin dust smudged across my fingertips, familiar as prayer. "There," I said. "Now the room belongs to you for 4 minutes, take it." Behind me, very quiet, Lorenzo said, "There it is." I turned. He stood in the wing in a black suit that made half the volunteer mothers forget what they were holding. Time had not softened him in the ways strangers would notice. Men still went still when he entered. Guards still watched doors differently around him. But his darkness had been joined by other things now: patience, chosen gentleness, the ability to stand in a children's recital hall holding juice boxes without making it absurd. His gaze was not on my face. It was on the way I had angled my body around the frightened girl, on the rosin dust on my fingers, on the fact that, even now, I had protected someone smaller before I thought of myself. The same thing. I knew it because I saw the old wound move through him like weather remembered by bone. Rosa took the stage. The first notes wavered, then steadied. The audience listened. I stepped back beside Lorenzo in the wing. "You brought juice boxes for Lucia's students. That is unexpectedly adorable." He looked insulted. "Don't use that word on me in public." I smiled. "Then stop doing adorable things." He leaned closer, voice low enough that only I heard it. "Impossible." That still had the power to make my pulse forget its training. During intermission, Nico appeared in a velvet blazer the color of very expensive regret. "Mara says I look like a casino magician," he told me mournfully. Mara, carrying clipboards and wearing a gold pencil in her hair like a weapon, passed by and said, "You do." He looked at Lorenzo. "If she ever marries me, I want it written somewhere official that I persisted against active hostility." "Noted," Lorenzo said gravely. Rosa played beautifully. Leah nearly made me cry. Lucia accompanied one of the younger students on piano, with a fierce concentration that reminded me painfully of the child she had been before gunfire entered her vocabulary. Gianni, thinner but very much alive, dozed through one speech and denied it with aristocratic contempt when accused. At the end of the night, after the last parent had gathered scarves and instrument cases, and every child had been praised at least twice, I stood alone on stage under work, lights coiling my shoulder rest into the violin case. The empty hall hummed softly, seats, dust, distant city through old walls. Lorenzo came up the aisle without hurrying. "Everyone's gone?" I asked. "Yes, even Nico." "He left with Mara." I blinked. "Voluntarily. He was carrying her clipboards like sacred texts." I laughed and closed the case. He reached me at center stage and held out his hand. "Come here." I went. The hall was cold enough that I could feel the marble memory under the worn stage boards. He took my left hand carefully, turned it palm up, and brought it to his face. The scent of rosin still clung to my skin. Pine, dust, wood smoke from the lobby fireplace. The sensory thread of the whole strange year. He inhaled once, eyes closing. "Chapter 1 again?" I asked softly. He opened his eyes. "No." His thumb stroked the slightly crooked line of my healed finger. Worse? How is that worse? Because now I know exactly what it costs me. I could have asked him to explain. I didn't. He was saying more than enough. He lifted my hand to his mouth and kissed the base of my ring finger, then the old fracture line, then my palm. The same man who once called me Little Fury because I bled and glared in a ballroom now held my damaged hand like the center of his religion. I noticed you because you were in pain, he said. I stayed lost because you weren't thinking about yourself. The truth of it moved through me so deeply I had to look away for a second before it showed too much on my face. Down in the street, a siren passed and faded. The city remained what it had always been: hungry, compromised, lit in all the wrong places. His world had not become safe. I had chosen it anyway. When I looked back at him, I saw no ballroom ghost, no war chapel, no man measuring rooms for threats before tenderness. Only Lorenzo, still dangerous. Still mine in the quiet, improbable way that mattered. "Take me home," I said. His expression warmed at the edges. "Yes, Little Fury." Same 2 words, entirely different life. He picked up my violin case before I could. Of course he did. At the wing door, I paused and looked back once at the empty stage, the chairs, the music stands, the place where fear had become sound, and sound had become something like shelter. Then I followed him out. If love asks you to walk knowingly into a dangerous life because you have seen the human soul inside it, would you call that courage or ruin? Would you have chosen Lorenz and let all that blood become the price of this ordinary, impossible tenderness? And have you ever loved someone enough to stay after seeing exactly what they are?